Hello, my name is Joanne Knight. Welcome to the barn. I've been thinking about how to do a series of barn buddies that would be helpful to you in understanding CreativeStudio version 7, and it occurred to me that my Pay It Forward quilt might be a really good one to use in different segments. So the next little series of barn buddies is going to be on this quilt that you see on the screen that I call Paying It Forward, and I'm going to take you through the blocks and how I use different techniques and how I set up this quilt and how I quilted it out. It'll be a nice little journey for me, so I hope that you enjoy it as much as I do. This quilt was entered into Paducah, and it did make it into Fall Paducah, and it was such an honor for me to have it hanging there. I'm going to show you a couple of pictures of some of the blocks that are finished when they're quilted. This quilt was made up of a series of blocks done by students, Southern Bells, and given to Anita and I. Joyce Lundrigan and I came up with the layout of the quilt, and it had a very special meaning to me. I wanted to honor the Bells and the blocks that they donated to me, and be able to show Southern Belle in the center. It is a pretty unusual setting for a sampler quilt, and I think that's one of the things that people like the most about it and how it comes off. Each one of these blocks had a different style quilting. It was over the top and it was very custom, but I wanted that for my quilt. This set of barn buddies, like I said, is going to be a look into how I place some of these patterns and how I quilted out these blocks. So let's go. The first block that we're going to talk about in my quilt is the one that is in the top left corner, and this is a Dresden plate with little points on it. I used fill to be able to place these little pearl patterns in circular array, and then I came back with Anita Shackelford's trim crosshatch background, and I was really happy with the way this block quilted out. So let me show you how I did it. What you see on the screen is the first row of the quilt with a block in the upper left and a block in the upper right. We're going to talk about this block right here with the Dresden plate, but before we do that, I want to show you these patterns right here. This is nothing more than a pattern by Kim Diamond. This is the same pattern that I have brought onto the screen. It is called Renee Sash, and I liked it because if you notice, there are 45-degree angles at the sides of this particular row of the quilt, and this pattern was really good to be able to do a fill because it looked like it fit perfectly in that 45-degree, and so that's why I chose it. My plan for the quilt is to quilt it like a round robin. So what is quilted in this top row is also quilted down the left side, the right side, and at the bottom of the quilt, so that it looks like just a round robin quilt done in borders all the way around in the white spaces. This pattern right here is a modular design by Joyce Lundrigan, and I did a apply with draw line going from the right side of this portion of the white section to the left side and apply and quilted that out. This section right here is a border corner pattern by Nancy Hackey, and it happens to be this pattern right here that I just placed on a 45. If I select the pattern and I go down to my selected properties and enter 45, and then rotate that pattern around, you can see that that's exactly the same pattern that I put in this area and just did a fill on it. So that's the white area of row 1. We're going to talk about this area right here with this Dresden plate on this block. I chose this particular pattern, and it's called Point to Point Dresden plate, and it also is a Kim Diamond pattern. It is this little pattern right here. So it to me was perfect for this Dresden. It has 20 blades in it, and all I did was take this pattern and take its little points. Let me put this right here where you can see it, and I'm going to rotate it around a little bit until it fits. just like this. Made it just a little bit larger because I wanted it to fill up that space. Now you know that if your rotation anchors are a little bit fussy on you, you can hit your plus or your minus on your selected pattern properties and it will rotate that pattern ever so slightly. What I did then was go to my nodes, my F7, make sure that this complete circle is above my boundary, and I just moved these little lines of the pattern down underneath my boundary, and you'll see why I did that in just a second. So let me get rid of the one that I used. I'm now going to select this pattern, and I'm going to go to circular array, and it is one of my items on my tool strip because I use it so much. It will remember the last number that I used, but I'm going to change that to 20 because I had 20 blades in this particular Dresden. CreativeStudio does connect them. They're a little wider than I want, so I'm going to uncheck connect, and I am going to pull up this little blue circle by holding down my left mouse button and just dragging it in ever so slightly. Hit OK. Don't be concerned about all of those teal markers. I then, because I am so type A, took each one of these patterns and just moved them until they fit like I wanted to in that boundary. As long as that little bottom part, those straight lines, as long as those straight lines are still underneath this boundary, then I'm good to go. So give me just a little minute and let me place all of those patterns right where I want them. I won't bore you with me doing this. It's just basically using my F10 anchors or my F9 anchors and positioning those patterns, every single one of them, in these blades. So let me do that and I'll get right back to you. Once I have all of these patterns adjusted the way that I want them to be, it was important that it fit within the blade and that these pearls on the bottom be complete pearls because we don't want them cut off. You notice that I have a blue boundary on the outside of my block, because for every single one of these blocks, I did the stitch in the ditch on the outside edges of the blocks. These were 9-inch blocks. I then converted that to a boundary to be able to do my quilting on the inside. I want to use fill for these Dresden blades, so I'm going to have to take that boundary and I'm going to have to convert it back to a pattern, because CreativeStudio is not going to be happy if I have 3 boundaries, and that's what I've got, because I've got this outside boundary, plus I have this inside boundary right here that you could barely see, that is the inside circle of that Dresden. So I'm going to have to select all my patterns, and I am doing a marquee select from left to right so that I don't get that outside boundary seam. That pattern, I have all of my patterns selected. I have an outside boundary with the Dresden points and an inside boundary with the circle. So I am going to select fill inside, and CreativeStudio is going to do that. And you will now see that they will all sew out continuously. Let me select that and do order join so that it's my very first pattern. And I'm going to do virtual stitch out. Speed it up with my plus key, and you're going to see that every single one of those stitches out continuously. Not only did it stitch out continuously, but it did the stitch in the ditch all the way around the center of this Dresden. So that made it especially easy to do. The only place that I don't have stitch in the ditch is whenever it gets to this very last one. And when it gets to that very last one, it's going to stop because I don't have any stitch in the ditch around that one and my start of my first pattern. So easy to do. I'm going to now select my inside boundary, that little circle, and I'm using the letter K to do that, and I am going to delete that boundary because I need to then put in my background fill. You want to make sure that these Dresden points are still accurate if you had a really dense fill. If I did have a very dense fill in the background, I would have stitched the background first, but this one is not real dense. Select this pattern, convert back to a boundary. I'm going to move this Dresden fill out of the way because I don't want it to interfere with what I'm going to show you. Place this pattern, do my F9 anchor, pull that in until it fits like I want it to fit. Pull this side out just a little bit. You will notice in the picture when I showed it that I had these crosshatch go all the way to the edge. I did not have this little scallop right here. So once I get the pattern positioned like I need it positioned, I'm going to simply pull that edge out until this crosshatch is going to completely cover up those corners and I won't get this scalloped edge. That makes that pattern even more versatile. I also want to make sure that I don't have any of this going on right here where this little pattern line crosses over the slightest little bit in that Dresden, because what that's going to do is it's going to make it stitch around the outside of that Dresden. So let me go to nodes, and you notice these nodes with this particular pattern on the inside. You want to make sure that snap is off, but I'm going to hold down my left mouse button and I'm going to pull this up until it does not have that one tiny little crossover right there. Watch what I do on this one. Hold down my left mouse button, move this one out of the way. I want this one right here, and what I'm talking about is this one little area right here. If I just move this node back until it's underneath, I'm not going to have that overstitching right there, and that's going to be really important to me. That's what I'm doing, is just traveling around this pattern and making sure that I have no little lines that are going to cross out from under that Dresden. My pattern is selected. My boundary does not have to be selected, and I'm going to do fill inside. What this did for me is once again do my stitch in the ditch around this particular block. So I did not have to do the stitch in the ditch on this block first because CreativeStudio is going to do it for me since I pulled that pattern out beyond my boundary. The only part that it left that I needed to do the stitch in the ditch was right here at the stopping point and the starting point of that pattern. And you can see that I have blue boundary lines, and with blue boundary lines that means I will not have any overstitching. Place my Dresden pattern back so you can see what that looked like. The only thing that left me on this block was to place a very simple pattern in the center, and that's what I did with this pattern right here. The pattern is called Double Circle and Diamonds, and I brought it into the center because the fabric was really busy, but it was too big an area to leave unquilted. So I wanted to do something with a little channel effect. Bring that pattern in right there, quilted it, and that's what I ended up with for this particular block on my quilt, and I was really happy with the way that it turned out. I hope that gave you a little bit of insight. The quilt looked like it was really complicated, but when you break it down, it truly was not. And I hope that's what I'm going to show you in these barn buddies. So until I get the next block ready for you, thank you for joining me in the barn.